Rainer Steelwind leaned back in a wooden lounge chair that had seen better days and tried to ignore the sticky heat of Arathia's late afternoon. Two suns glared overhead, their twin rays slicing across the pristine beach and saturating everything in a pale golden glow. He lifted a glass of something sweet. He wasn't sure what it was called, only that it had been served in a coconut-like shell and tasted vaguely of honey and spice. Supposedly, it was a local specialty that visitors loved. For Rainer, it was simply part of playing the tourist. He had promised himself no more complicated missions, no more shootouts, no more infiltration. Just rest. Rest, and maybe a bit of oblivion under the bright Orathian suns. He closed his eyes, letting the slow lullaby of rolling waves at his feet ease away the tension in his neck. He wore a loose linen shirt, tan trousers rolled above the ankles, and sandals that left half of his toes uncovered. Not exactly the stoic uniform of a former special operative, but that was precisely the point. He was incognito, or so he told himself each time he spotted one of the other resort guests giving him sideways glances. It was difficult to hide the sinewy lines of his body or the haunted look behind his calm gray eyes. Yet Orathia, famed for its scenic beaches and lush forests, was just a place to lose yourself. After everything that had happened, betrayals, near-death experiences, the sense that the galaxy was unraveling, he needed this peace. Peace. The word echoed in his mind like a taunt, because he knew in his gut that it was never truly that simple. Sure enough, the day was about to remind him of exactly who he was. A flicker of movement crossed his peripheral vision. Rainer stiffened. There, farther up the beach, two men in dark attire spoke in hushed tones. He recognized the stance of professional watchers, the subtle tilt of a head as they surveyed the crowd, searching for someone. Every instinct told him to be cautious. He quickly averted his gaze, pretending to study the swirling patterns in his exotic beverage. He was sure these men worked for someone dangerous. Perhaps they belonged to the same group he had fled months ago when he decided to vanish. Maybe they were bounty hunters, or maybe they were with Atheon's forces. Atheon. The name alone brought a bitter taste to his mouth. That empire had expanded across star systems, absorbing or crushing anyone in its path. Some worlds surrendered without a fight. Others, like Arathia, pretended everything was fine as they quietly harbored pockets of resistance. Rainer saw the men look his way. No point lying to himself now. They recognized him. As soon as one of them started striding across the sand, Rainer mentally prepared for action. He set his drink aside and stood. His vantage gave him a view of the lush green forest that framed the beach, the place where the tree line parted to reveal a rough jungle interior. If he had to run, that was likely the best route. The men quickened their pace. Rainer inhaled, sensing his old training spark to life, an unwelcome but familiar companion. So much for a relaxing holiday. Before he could move, something whistled through the air near his right cheek. A flicker of motion, small, fast, precise. He caught it purely by reflex, one hand flashing up to seize the object just before it could sink into his flesh. A dart. Its tip glistened with a dark green substance that smelled faintly of bitter almonds, a hallmark of toxins known to paralyze or kill. Rainer let out a slow exhale and turned toward the direction it came from. Standing half-hidden by the wide leaves of a twisted palm, a tall figure stared at him in utter disbelief. It was a woman, some kind of local huntress, from the look of her minimal leather-like attire and the bow-like apparatus she held at her side. She had raven black hair braided down her back, and her skin was a deep bronze that practically shimmered under the double sunlight. But her expression was pure shock, as though she couldn't believe he had caught her dart. Rainer guessed it was no small feat. She looked dangerous, with toned muscles and sharp eyes that suggested a lifetime of prowling lethal jungles. He flicked his gaze back to the would-be watchers. They froze, perhaps uncertain if the dart was meant for them or for him. The woman stepped out of the foliage, raising her chin defiantly, though her eyes still showed uncertainty. She parted her lips, as though searching for words. Rainer glanced at the dart in his hand. It definitely wasn't a playful greeting. He could have reacted violently, He'd done so many times in his past when threatened, but something stayed his hand. Maybe curiosity, maybe the sense that she'd realized her mistake. She advanced a step, speaking in a low, melodic voice that Raynor didn't understand at first. Then she switched languages with halting effort. You caught it. Impossible. The watchers in black parted, circling to flank. Raynor's left. He could almost hear their tension. Meanwhile, the woman faced him as if the rest of the beach didn't exist. Her eyes flashed from the dart to his face. Despite the adrenaline pumping through him, he felt a strange humor at the situation. Here he was, so careful about being tracked, only to have some exotic huntress nearly take him out on the shore in broad daylight. You shot it, Raynor said calmly, and I caught it. Not exactly how I wanted my day to go. He tried to keep his voice low, unwilling to provoke the watchers into opening fire. He could sense them creeping closer, but for the moment, the bizarre standoff held everyone in place. The woman took another step. She wore banded arm guards and a quiver that contained at least a dozen more darts, each presumably coated in lethal poison. Her posture was proud, but uncertain. I am Zelina Stormruin of the Stormruin clan, she said in a heavy accent. I was told intruders approached the sacred outskirts. I thought you were an enemy. Her eyes drifted to the men, who paused as if uncertain which threat was worse, this huntress or the man who had just plucked a dart from a dare. Raynor's heart beat faster. He was certain that any second, one of them would pull a weapon. Instead, the woman's sudden realization turned her face pale. You caught my dart. Yes, Raynor repeated. I did. She swallowed, then whispered something under her breath that sounded like a curse. By the ancient law of Stormruin, she said, if a dart of bonding is shot and caught without drawing blood, the woman is bound to the man. He is her mate, and she is his. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. This cannot be. For a moment, Raynor simply stared, uncertain if he had heard her correctly or if perhaps it was a language barrier. Then he registered the watchers shifting behind him, obviously confused as well. The woman, Zelina, looked genuinely distraught. Raynor found himself responding in a low murmur. I'm sorry, what? She enunciated each word clearly. The dart carried a special poison. It is used to claim a life. If that life catches it first, then that life is chosen. This is an unbreakable vow. Raynor had seen strange customs on distant worlds. He negotiated treaties with desert tribes who demanded bizarre rites. But this? It was, ironically, almost comedic. If the situation weren't so tense, he might have laughed. Look, Zelina, I don't want to impose on any vow. I just want. He never got a finish. One of the watchers lunged, drawing a baton that crackled with energy. Raynor reacted instantly, stepping aside, deflecting the blow. He brought his elbow around, smashing the man's nose. The second watcher drew a small blaster, but Zelina spun with fluid grace, releasing a second dart in a single graceful motion. It lodged in the man's forearm. He dropped, screaming, as the poison burned through his veins. The entire skirmish took mere seconds. Raynor inhaled sharply, darted his eyes about for any further threats, and found none. The beach was empty except for a few terrified resort guests who had fled at the sight of trouble. Zelina's chest rose and fell with each breath. She studied Raynor. You fight well. He forced a grin. I've had some training. She hurried to the unconscious watcher, retrieved her dart, and muttered something about wasted poison. Raynor peered around, certain that more would come, that the ruckus would draw attention. We should move, he said. Those men aren't alone. Zelina's green eyes flicked toward the jungle. Follow me. It is safer beneath the canopy. Part of him wanted to resist. He had no desire to get tangled with local traditions or further violence. But those watchers had recognized him. More would come. They always did. And he made a vow to himself never to let innocents get hurt on his account again. He nodded. Together, they sprinted from the beach, past the last line of huts and food stalls, into the shadowy depths of Arathia's rainforest. The air changed the instant they stepped under the colossal trees. The humidity was thick, the temperature somehow cooler, but the dampness more intense. Lianas dripped from branches overhead, and the chirp of alien insects echoed all around. Lush ferns brushed their calves, and every trunk sprouted clusters of vibrant purple blossoms that looked poisonous in their own right. Zelina moved with a stealthy grace that Raynor couldn't help admiring. Twice she halted him with a hand gesture pointing to hidden tripwires or natural hazards. Stormwind territory, indeed. They finally came to rest by a large banyan-like tree whose roots formed a natural alcove. Raynor wiped sweat from his brow and tried to catch his breath. Zelina crouched, bout in hand, scanning their surroundings. Her features were sharp and unwavering, like a predator. At length, she exhaled. "You are not a simple traveler," she said quietly. "The way you fought." Raynor shrugged. "Let's just say I've tried to retire, but trouble finds me." Her lips curved slightly, an expression that was half a smile, half bitterness. "We have that in common." She studied his face again. "You are aware, yes, of what my people's law states. That by catching the dart, you become my rightful mate." He tried to find the right words that wouldn't offend her or her culture. "I heard you, but that can't be enforced in reality, can it?" She gave a rueful laugh. "It can. My clan is strict. The Stormwind hold these vows sacred. If you had taken that dart to the shoulder, you'd be writhing in agony, or worse. You caught it. Only once in our recorded lore has that happened, and he lost 2 fingers in the process." Raynor checked his hand, flexing it in mild surprise. "I still have mine. That means the vow is doubly binding." He suppressed a groan. The galaxy never lacked for irony. "All right, well look, maybe we can say it was a misunderstanding. I won't hold you to anything." Zelina's eyes darkened. "It is not so simple. The clan demands fidelity to the old ways. If we appear, they will perform the binding ritual. You and I will be wedded in the eyes of Stormwind custom." She tossed her head. "Unless you want to defy them, but that would lead to consequences." He massaged the back of his neck. "You said it's unbreakable. Are there alternatives? Some way to dissolve it?" "Only if the woman kills the man, or if the man voluntarily surrenders his life." Her tone was neutral, but the meaning was grim. No middle ground. Raynor huffed a soft laugh. "That's quite a courtship tradition." "I do not like it either," she shot back, bristling. "I was taught to protect my tribe, not to become some bride. I only fired the dart because I feared you were a threat." Footsteps cracked somewhere in the undergrowth. Both stiffened, falling silent, eyes scanning for movement. Then the footsteps receded. Whoever it was, probably another search party. Raynor resumed breathing. "This planet was supposed to be a peaceful backwater," he said under his breath. "I needed a place to hide. Didn't realize Atheon had such a foothold here." "A foothold?" She scowled. "They have more than that. They have entire hidden bases, storehouses for vile weapons. They test them on wildlife, even on my people. We are scattered, forced to fight with our primitive means." Raynor turned toward her. "I suspected they'd be looking for me, but I had no idea they were expanding their presence so quickly." She angled her head. "You have faced Atheon before. There was no point in lying." "Yes, I was part of a special unit that fought them on the frontier. We tried to keep them from swallowing entire star systems. Then some of our own leadership betrayed us, and the mission fell apart. I barely survived." She studied his face a moment longer. "I see." They stood there in awkward silence, listening to the rustle of the canopy. Raynor considered the facts. He had watchers from Atheon on his tail, presumably more on the way. Zelina was bound by some archaic vow to treat him as her mate, yet she clearly had no desire for this union. He needed allies, someone who knew the land and could help him slip off-world if necessary. She might just be the best candidate, ironically enough. Finally, he spoke. "Since we're stuck with each other in one way or another, maybe we should cooperate. I'm guessing you know how to navigate these jungles. I know how to handle these Atheon hounds. If they're after me, they might also harm your clan." She pursed her lips. "You are right. The more the Empire invests in Arathia, the more they will brutalize my people. Kulme." She gestured deeper into the forest. "We cannot linger here." They journeyed over broken terrain, crossing mossy rocks and stepping through shallow streams that sparkled with bioluminescent algae. Zelina paused occasionally to point out a venomous viper coiled on a branch or a cluster of toxic mushrooms that let out spores if disturbed. Along the way, Raynor confessed he had only basic knowledge of the local environment, gleaned from a quick reading of a tourist pamphlet. She snorted softly at that. "A pamphlet will not save you from the storm-run boar," she said. "If you see one, climb a tree." He nearly asked if it was bigger or more aggressive than the boars he'd seen on other planets, but from the dead-serious look on her face, he guessed it was. Once again, he was struck by the sense that while Atheon was the greatest threat, Orathia itself wasn't exactly safe either. Probably part of the reason the Empire had chosen it. Many hostile species roamed the forests, offering an extra layer of deterrence for anyone who dared oppose them. After an hour of careful progress, they stopped to rest near a wide lagoon fed by a waterfall. The water glowed faintly in the twilight. Phosphorescent minerals, Zelina explained, that reacted with certain microorganisms. Raynor splashed some on his face, grateful for the cool relief. She knelt by a cluster of tall reeds, rummaging for something. He watched as she pulled out a handful of tubers with a pungent smell. "For dinner," she explained. "We can eat them raw. They give energy." She handed him one. He bit into the fibrous root, trying not to grimace at the bitter tang. They sat in a companionable silence. Raynor's gaze roamed across her features. There was something regal in the way she carried herself, a fierce pride that matched the swirling tattoos along her forearms. He felt a pang of guilt at having trapped her in this vow. "I really am sorry," he said softly, "about the dart thing." She let out a slow breath. "I do not blame you. I never expected anyone to catch it. But it is done." She glanced at him. "Our ways are old. Some of my clan might see you as a sign, a champion. Others will see you as a curse." She lowered her voice to a near whisper. "And I do not know which is true." He cleared his throat, not sure how to respond. "Maybe neither. Let's just try not to kill each other. That's a start." Her mouth curved in a faint, wry smile. Then, from the jungle floor behind them, came a rustling of leaves. In a heartbeat, they rose to their feet. Zelina notched a fresh dart, Raynor's body tensing for a fight. He recognized the silhouette of an Atheon soldier stepping out from behind a tree, weapon raised. Then two more behind him. They must have tracked them from the beach. The lead soldier called out, "Stand down, or we open fire." Raynor lunged at Zelina, pulling her down behind a thick root as a volley of bright pulses seared the air where their heads had been. She hissed in frustration. "We must retreat." "No argument here," Raynor breathed. He scanned quickly for a path. The lagoon was on one side, the soldiers on the other. That left a narrow route around the waterfall up a ridge of slick, rocky outcroppings. "Come on." They scrambled upward as more blasts scorched the air. A sharp chunk of rock cut into Raynor's palm, but he ignored the pain, hauling Zelina forward. She returned fire with her dart launcher, but the soldiers had armor. A direct hit to exposed flesh would drop them, but it was a small target. One soldier tumbled off the ledge, yelping as a dart found his neck. The others pressed closer. Raynor found a precarious path behind the waterfall. Sheets of water hammered down, forming a deafening curtain. He used the wet rocks for cover as best he could. Soon they emerged on the other side, facing dense forest again. Another shot blasted close enough to singe Raynor's hair. Zelina whirled around, fired a dart at the soldier closest behind them. This time, she aimed for the gap in his visor. He collapsed with a strangled cry. Sprinting away from the waterfall, they plunged into thicker vegetation. The soldiers' shouts echoed behind them, but the undergrowth grew so dense that it slowed the pursuit. Zelina proved adept at weaving through vines and bramble, and Raynor followed, ignoring the stings and scratches. Eventually, the shouting faded. Finally, they crashed into a small clearing, hearts pounding, mud and leaves clinging to their clothes and skin. Zelina raised a hand for silence. They listened. No immediate pursuit. She exhaled, glancing at him. "You run well for someone who claims to be on vacation." He let out a short laugh. "I was retired. Now it seems I'm back in the game." Nightfall came quickly on Orathia, the canopy overhead blocking much of the fading light. Zelina insisted they keep moving in near darkness. They used the faint glow from certain fungi to guide them through a labyrinth of tree trunks, eventually emerging at what appeared to be a hidden encampment. Raynor noticed small huts made of woven branches, camouflage netting that blended with the environment, and the hum of a portable generator. Lights flickered as they stepped inside a clearing lined with battered crates. Several figures rose to greet them, weapons at the ready. One, a tall man with close-cropped hair and a cybernetic arm, stepped forward, then froze in shock. "Raynor Steelwind?" Raynor let out a breath. He recognized the voice, though he hadn't heard it in a long time. "General Laris?" The man was older than Raynor remembered, but the scar across his left eye was unmistakable. Last Raynor had heard, Laris was presumed dead on a mission deep in Atheon territory. Apparently not. Laris strode forward, a disbelieving grin on his weathered face, and clasped Raynor's arm. "You ghosted us. Everyone thought you were done. I can't believe you're here." Raynor eyed the small group that formed a loose circle around them. Men and women, some with rifles, others with improvised gear. "I took some time out," he said carefully. "Didn't expect to find you on Orathia, leading a resistance movement, no less." Zelina watched from the side, uncertain. Laris turned to regard her. "Stormrun, yes? We've been trying to build alliances with your people." She stiffened. "I am Zelina Stormrun." Laris nodded approvingly. "We owe a debt to your clan. They've guided us through these jungles, shown us hidden routes. We're all fighting the same enemy." His gaze flicked to Raynor, then to Zelina. "You arrived together?" They exchanged glances. Raynor decided not to mention the vow yet. "Let's say circumstances forced us to cooperate." Laris gestured toward the largest hut, a makeshift command center with a rickety table. "Let's talk inside. I want to hear everything." Inside the dimly lit space, Raynor noticed battered star charts pinned to the walls. The map of Orathia's continents was marked with red circles, presumably Atheon strongholds or supply points. Laris explained that the Empire had chosen Orathia as a hub for distributing advanced bioweapons throughout neighboring systems. The local environment was ideal for testing, given the planet's wide variety of lethal flora and fauna. "Every day, they expand their presence," Laris said. "They set up new research labs, supply depots. We're just a small band of fighters. Atheon's resources are vast." He ran a hand over his short hair. "We've been trying to recruit the Stormrun tribe. Their knowledge of the land gives us a huge advantage." Zelina folded her arms. "My people do not trust outsiders easily. Many of us prefer to remain hidden and let you kill each other. But the Empire has begun scorching our villages, testing their toxins on our animals. We cannot stand by forever. So we are all allied by necessity," Raynor concluded. Laris nodded. "Atheon is looking for me, as well. Now they know you're here. They'll triple their efforts to track us down. They see us as a nuisance. We can either strike first or be hunted." Raynor's mind churned. He'd come to Orathia, trying to escape, but it was clear the conflict had caught him anyway. And that vow with Zelina. He spared her a glance. She stood at the edge of the room, eyes glittering with apprehension. He wondered if she already regretted having him anywhere near her clan. A rebellious part of him stirred. Maybe this time he could do it right. No betrayal from superiors, no hidden agendas. Just a small group of dedicated people trying to free their planet. He'd always been good at infiltration, sabotage, and turning an enemy's strength into weakness. A flash of memory. The last mission he led, an utter fiasco when a high-ranking official sold them out to Atheon. Yet this could be a chance at redemption, or at least a chance to protect innocence. He exhaled softly. "What's the plan?" Laris's lips twitched in a faint smile. "We have a theory. Word is the Stormrun clan guards something called Long Fong, a potent toxin that neutralizes certain genetically modified creatures. If we can harness that, we might counter Atheon's bioweapons." Zelina's brow furrowed. Long Fong is the name of a secret venom derived from our sacred serpents. It is extremely dangerous to produce and use. My clan's elders guard it. I'm not sure they'll share it with outsiders. Or me, for that matter. Raynor sensed the tension in her voice. But with it, we could stop their monstrous expansions. She inhaled. We might. If properly formulated, it shuts down enhanced cell growth. Atheon has been breeding more beasts, rumored to carry unstoppable viruses. Long Fong is the only known substance that can paralyze these mutations. Laris tapped the table. Exactly. My scouts have heard rumors that Atheon plans a large-scale demonstration here, on Orathia, to show the galaxy their new living weapons. If we can sabotage that demonstration, show that their unstoppable beasts can be stopped, it would be a blow to their morale and reputation. Silence settled as the weight of the plan took hold. It wasn't just a skirmish. It was a high-stakes gambit. Raynor finally broke the quiet. Then we need to talk to the Stormrun elders. Zelena nodded, though her eyes flickered with hesitation. They won't be pleased to see me bringing more outsiders. A muscle in Raynor's jaw tightened. We don't have another choice. If Atheon grows unstoppable, they'll destroy the clan along with everything else. Let's try to reason with them. Thus the next morning found the three of them, Raynor, Zelena, and Laris, trekking deeper into Stormrun territory. More huts, half hidden by curtains of vines, revealed that the tribe had a complex system of life in the forest. Stormrun warriors perched on elevated platforms, scanning the jungle floor below for threats. As the group approached, there were murmurs and suspicious glares. Eventually, they were led into a large communal clearing, where the tribe's venerable leader, Elder Orion, awaited. He was an older man, with hair braided into intricate loops and eyes as sharp as an eagle's. He wore a mantle of woven feathers, each representing a huntsman's kill. Orion's gaze slid immediately to Zelena. A hush fell over the clan members who watched from the sidelines. Zelena Stormrun, he said, voice resonant. You return with outsiders and the stench of conflict. She bowed her head respectfully. Elder Orion, I have reason. The Empire has grown bolder. They threaten our lands. Orion's gaze shifted to Raynor, scanning him from head to toe. And this one, Isensa Stranges Aura. Why does he stand so near you? Raynor stiffened, bracing for Zelena to mention the vow. But she hesitated, eyes flicking between Orion and Raynor. Finally, she said in a careful tone, he has proven to be a strong ally. He caught my dart. A ripple of murmurs coursed through the onlookers. Orion's expression changed from stern curiosity to alarm. Caught it? Are you certain? Zelena bowed her head, refusing to elaborate. Orion stared at Raynor. That means you belong to each other under the ancient law. Raynor cleared his throat awkwardly. I realize it's a big deal. But before we get into that, we need your help. The elder's eyes narrowed. Why should we help you? Because you bring war to our jungles? Raynor felt tension coil in his chest, but Laris stepped forward. The general explained Atheon's plan, the threat of unstoppable beasts, the demonstration that would seal Orathia's fate. Stormrun had already lost outlying villages to raids and experiments. Now the Empire might escalate. This affects you, Laris concluded. It's not just an off-worlder's fight. Orion listened in silence, his wrinkled face betraying no emotion. Finally, he spoke. You come seeking Long Fong. That is the Stormrun secret. Why should we share it? Zelena lifted her chin. Because if we do nothing, Atheon will destroy us anyway. Long Fong might be our only chance to stop their nightmares. The elder's gaze softened slightly. I see your conviction. But the preparation of Long Fong requires the blood of the Serapis serpent, which dwells within the forbidden caves of Sanhara. Few survive an encounter with Serapis. Raynor and Laris exchanged glances. Raynor spoke quietly. We'll do whatever it takes. He glanced at Zelena. All of us. Orion scrutinized them. Then he murmured, if you truly intend to face Serapis, you have my permission, though not my blessing. He gestured to a group of clan warriors around them. They will guide you as far as they dare. But know this, if Serapis claims your life, the Stormrun will not mourn for outsiders who poke the serpent's lair. Zelena dipped her head in acknowledgement. Orion then fixed Raynor with a penetrating stare. And you, man who caught the dart, Ancient law binds you to one of our fiercest hunters. If you survive and stand by her side, you shall be recognized as part of the Stormrun. If you flee, you will be an enemy. Raynor felt the weight of that ultimatum. He already knew he couldn't run from Atheon or from Zelina's vow. He nodded. Understood. That night, the trio prepared to leave for the caves at dawn. Laris busied himself checking weapons. Though their technology was minimal, most of the real hardware was stashed in their hidden camp. Zelina stood off to the side, quietly gathering her poison darts. Raynor approached, uncertain. You okay? She nodded, though her face was unreadable. I've dreamed of exploring beyond our territory, but not like this. Not on such a perilous quest. He took a moment to consider her profile, the fierce lines of her jaw, the sadness lurking behind her proud gaze. We'll get through it. We have to. She exhaled. You realize if we succeed, the elders will expect us to formalize the vow. He managed a half-smile. It's hard to imagine marriage in the midst of all this chaos. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Stormrun life is rarely peaceful. We celebrate union while we can, because war is always near. For me, it was never a choice I wanted. Then her voice softened. But I also see your courage. I've been taught that the vow is fate, but I'm not sure I believe in fate. Raynor wanted to say something comforting, but words felt clumsy. Finally, he just said, we'll figure out together. The next morning, accompanied by 3 Stormrun warriors, they headed toward the far side of Arathia's largest rainforest, where rocky cliffs rose like jagged teeth. The trek spanned 2 days across uneven ground. At night, they sheltered in the trees' upper branches to avoid prowling beasts. On the second afternoon, they arrived at the entrance to the Sanhara Caves, a yawning maw in the cliff face from which a steady rush of hot, humid air emerged. The Stormrun warriors refused to go any farther, citing old legends of serpent the size of 5 men that slept in the darkness. Zelina, Laris, and Raynor continued alone. Twisted stalactites hung overhead like fangs. Bioluminescent moss clung to the walls, casting an eerie green glow. Laris carried a small container meant to hold the serpent's blood. Zelina readied her bow. Raynor drew a battered pistol he'd salvaged from one of the watchers. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Deeper and deeper they went, the glow intensifying. Their footsteps echoed on wet stone. In the distance, water dripped in steady rhythms. Eventually, they reached a vast chamber where a silent pool of black water reflected the faint light. The moment Raynor stepped forward, something rippled beneath the surface. Serapis emerged, a colossal snake with shimmering scales that reflected the glow in shifting patterns of emerald and violet. Its eyes were 2 glowing orbs of predatory intelligence. The hiss it emitted sent a tremor through the cavern walls. Raynor's grip tightened on his pistol. Laris cursed under his breath. Zelina acted first. She launched a dart straight at the serpent's face, but the creature twisted with uncanny speed, the projectile bouncing off a ridge of scales. Serapis darted forward, mouth wide, revealing fangs longer than Raynor's forearm. The group scattered. Laris fired a makeshift tranquilizer round that fizzled harmlessly against Serapis's hide. Raynor aimed carefully, letting out 2 shots from his pistol. One bullet struck the snake's broad head with a clang, deflecting as though it had hit metal. Serapis roared, lashing its tail, sending Raynor tumbling into a pillar of rock. Pain flared across his ribs. Zelina circled to the serpent's flank, searching for a vulnerable spot. She notched another dart, this one coated in a lethal poison that caused muscle spasms. With a low exhale, she fired. The dart embedded into Serapis's side. The serpent howled, thrashing violently. Chunks of stalactite cracked and fell from the ceiling, one narrowly missing Laris. Raynor struggled to his feet, ignoring the sting in his ribs. "We need to draw more blood," he shouted. "We can't just kill it. We need the venom." Laris brandished the container. "We have to wound it enough that we can siphon the blood, but not let it thrash us to pieces." Serapis lunged at Zelina, who dove aside with cat-like reflexes. She rolled across the stone floor, snapping off another dart mid-roll. The serpent recoiled, hissing. Raynor saw the opening. He sprinted behind it, clambering up a low ridge of rock that allowed him to get above the monster. Balanced precariously, he aimed at the back of its head. The scales there looked slightly thinner. He fired twice. On the second shot, the serpent let out a deafening roar. A trickle of dark liquid oozed from the wound. Laris raced in, container ready, but Serapis whipped its tail around, striking him hard. The general flew into a wall and collapsed with a groan. Raynor cursed, jumping down to position himself between Serapis and Laris. The serpent's molten gaze pinned him. Another hiss rattled the cavern. Zelena, ignoring the danger, darted to the fallen general's side. "He's alive but stunned," she called. Serapis coiled back, preparing to strike Raynor. He had only one bullet left. He glanced quickly at Zelena, who met his gaze. Together, they nodded. She readied one final dart. Raynor fired his last shot at the serpent's mouth. The bullet tore through the corner of its jaw, drawing a spurt of thick, blackish blood. Serapis howled, thrashing again. In that heartbeat of opportunity, Zelena sprinted forward and plunged the container's siphon spike into the wound. Black blood began to fill the container. Serapis twisted, jaws snapping at Zelena's arm. Raynor lunged, grabbing the serpent's head from the side, trying to force it away. The sheer strength of the creature was overwhelming. It nearly flung him aside like a rag doll. But the precious seconds gave Zelena time to fill the container. At last, she yanked it free, sealing the top. Serapis's enormous body convulsed. A final tail swipe crashed into Raynor, sending him sprawling. He felt something tear in his left shoulder. Pain flared, but he had no time to dwell on it. The serpent screeched again, then sank back into the dark waters, leaving a swirl of black blood behind. Raynor sucked in ragged breaths, certain it would come at them again, but it did not. The creature slithered deeper into the depths, perhaps retreating to nurse its wounds. The cavern fell eerily silent save for their labored breathing. Zelena rushed to Raynor, container clutched tight. "We got it," she gasped, eyeing his injuries. "You're bleeding." He touched his shoulder, grimacing at the sticky wetness. "I'll live." They turned to Laris, who had managed to sit up, though he was clearly in pain. That thing's no myth," he panted. "Let's get out of here." Supporting each other, the three made their way back through the tunnels. The very walls felt alive with the echoes of Serapis's last roar. Outside the cave, the storm-run warriors stared in astonishment as Zelena held up the container of black blood. Wordlessly, the warriors dropped to one knee, a sign of deep respect or awe. No time to celebrate. They had to get this blood refined in a long fong, then figure out how to deploy it. Against Atheon, the journey back took 3 more days. At times, Raynor felt delirious from the wound in his shoulder, which Zelena treated with a herbal compress that burned like fire. Laris hobbled on a bruised leg, cursing under his breath that the younger fighters would have to carry him if it got any worse. Zelena hardly slept, determined to safeguard the precious container. Whenever Raynor drifted off, he dreamt of serpents and ancient laws binding him to a life of constant conflict. He found Zelena by his side each time he woke, her expression hovering between worry and stubborn determination. At last, they reached the Stormrun village. Elder Orion received them with solemn approval, nodding when he saw the sealed container. The clan shaman took it away to begin the lengthy process of distilling the blood into usable venom. Meanwhile, the rest of the tribe gathered to hear the tale of how they defeated Serapis. Whispers circulated about Raynor's prowess, about how Zelena had chosen him. Some viewed it as a sign of destiny. As the days passed, Raynor's shoulder began to heal. Zelena drifted in and out of his makeshift hut, checking on him. They spoke in hushed tones, each revealing bits of their past. He told her about the final mission that ended with him nearly dying aboard a starship after Atheon agents ambushed them. She confided how Stormrun tradition had stifled her desire to explore, to see other worlds, and that she resented the vow that forced her into a role she'd never expected. Yet there was a growing bond, a mutual respect, a closeness that formed in the face of adversity. Neither would openly call it love, not yet, but there was tenderness in how she changed his bandages, how he slipped her his own ration so she'd eat enough. In quiet moments, they even joked about the ridiculous circumstances that had brought them together. Then news arrived that Athion's demonstration was imminent. Their fleet was converging above Orathia, preparing to unleash a legion of enhanced war beasts upon designated test sites. It would be a spectacle of terror meant to cow any rebellion. "We have the venom, but how do we deliver it at scale?" Laris asked, pacing around the command hut that the clan allowed them to use. The solution came from an unlikely source, the Stormrune shamans, who had discovered a method to refine the Serapis blood into a gaseous agent that could be loaded into improvised warheads. If launched into the Athion ships or near their beasts on the ground, it would disable them, rendering them harmless. But they needed a delivery system sophisticated enough to fire these warheads at altitude. Laris had a battered transport shuttle hidden with his rebel group. With Raynor's mechanical expertise, perhaps they could modify it. Time was short. Athion's forces had begun massing near Orathia's northern plateau, where a massive fortress overshadowed the jungle. Intelligence from local scouts confirmed that within days, the Empire would bring key officials to witness the unstoppable power of their mutated beasts. Raynor gathered volunteers. Together, they traveled to Laris's rebel hideout, where they found the worn-down shuttle. Over the next 48 hours, they worked without sleep, jerry-rigging a launch system for the long Fong gas capsules. Zelina quietly joined in, mixing fresh poison for her darts and providing the shaman's specialized mixture. Stormrune warriors stood guard around the base, prepared for any surprise attack. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. The Athion fortress loomed on the horizon, surrounded by gunships patrolling the skies. Raynor, Zelina, and Laris loaded the warheads into the shuttle. The plan was to fly in low, release the long Fong gas over the designated area, and hope it neutralized the beasts. Then the rebel fighters on the ground, along with Stormrune allies, would mop up. A tall order, given how heavily guarded the fortress was. They launched at dawn. Cloud cover gave them some measure of concealment. Zelina rode as co-pilot, scanning the instruments with a determined scowl, though she had minimal experience with starship controls. Laris manned the small turret they'd installed. Raynor was at the helm, his shoulders still twinging but functional. As they neared the fortress, Athion's sensors lit up. Alarms rang inside the shuttle. They were detected. "Hold steady," Raynor said through clenched teeth. He banked hard to avoid a burst of anti-air fire. "Laris, are you ready with the warheads?" "Ready," came the shout from the back. "We only get one pass." They barreled toward the fortress. Below, Raynor saw open pens that contained towering creatures with mutated jaws and spines. Dread twisted in his stomach. If Athion unleashed those beasts, thousands on Orathia would die. With a firm hand, he dove the shuttle low. Gun emplacements on the fortress ramparts lit up the sky with deadly pulses. At least 2 blasts grazed their hull. "Now!" Zelina cried. Raynor flicked a series of switches. A muffled roar came from the cargo hold as the warheads launched, sailing downward in a neat arc. For a moment, there was silence. Then a greenish mist erupted over the entire courtyard. The mutated beasts howled, rearing and bucking. Soldiers scrambled in confusion as the creatures began collapsing under the effect of the long Fong gas. Pandemonium took hold on the ground. But the fortress defenses weren't idle. 2 interceptor craft soared into the air, peppering the shuttle with laser fire. Laris took aim, managing to damage one of them, but the other roared around behind them, locking on. An alarm shrilled as a missile approach warning lit the console. "We're done," Raynor said grimly, spinning the shuttle, searching for any gap in the cover. The missile streaked closer. Zelina stared at him, her eyes reflecting both fear and an odd acceptance. Then a second later, an explosion shook the air behind them, far enough not to destroy them. She blinked. "What?" Raynor glanced at the scanner. The rebel ground forces had fired a shoulder-launched rocket that took out the interceptor mid-chase. Cheering crackled over the comm. They were free to pull away. He guided the battered shuttle into a forest clearing a few kilometers from the fortress, setting down with a jarring impact. Smoke hissed from the engines, but at least they were alive. Opening the hatch, they stumbled out into a scene of jubilant rebel fighters arriving to greet them. Above the fortress, chaos raged. The mutated beasts were down, the soldiers panicked, and with reinforcements on the way, Athion's demonstration had turned into a humiliating disaster. The cost was not small. Many rebels had given their lives on the perimeter, drawing fire away from the shuttle. But the operation was an undeniable success. They had proven Athion's unstoppable beasts could be halted. Word would spread through the subjugated systems, inspiring more uprisings. Back at the Stormrune village, a rousing welcome awaited them. Even Elder Orion had to admit that the strangers had brought deliverance. The clan performed a celebratory dance around the great fire. Laris, battered and exhausted, stood with them, promising that the rebels would continue to strike at Athion's supply lines until the Empire retreated from Orathia. Then came the matter of the ancient law. Orion summoned Raynor and Zelena before the great fire. The entire clan gathered, curious to see how the vow would conclude. Zelena wore ceremonial garments, leather straps adorned with bright feathers and embedded with small polished stones. Raynor had cleaned up as best he could, though he still looked more soldier than suitor. Orion addressed them. You have fought side by side, faced Serapis, and saved our land from the Empire's cruelty. By the law of the dart you have caught, you are bound. The vow can be completed now, if you both consent. Do you? Zelena gazed at Raynor. For a moment, he worried she might say no. They hardly knew each other, truly. But the intensity of what they'd shared, the near-death moments, the trust that formed, shone in her eyes. She reached out and took his hand in hers. We do, she whispered, voice steady. Raynor squeezed her fingers gently. Yes, he said. We do. A cheer rose from the clan. Orion chanted ancient words that Raynor only half understood, but the final meaning was clear enough. The vow was sealed. Stormrune tradition recognized them as mates for life. Zelena's cheeks flushed. Raynor's heart pounded, not with the adrenaline of battle, but with an odd mixture of hope and awe. Later that evening, after the feasting and dancing, Zelena led Raynor away from the crowd to a quiet spot by the lagoon. Fireflies drifted over the water, their lights reflecting off its surface. They stood there, hand in hand, letting the warm air wash over them. Words felt unnecessary. This union had begun as a bizarre twist of fate, a law that neither had asked for. Yet it had grown into something real. They had risked their lives for each other, forging a bond that only adversity could create. I never planned to marry, Zelena said softly, her gaze on the shimmering lagoon. But if I had to choose a partner, I would want someone who is brave, who protects what he cares about, who understands loss and still dares to fight. She turned to him. I see that in you. Raynor reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. I've been running from my past, but maybe I found something worth staying for. She tilted her face to his, and he lowered his head. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of promise under the twin moonlight. The vow was more than a forced tradition now. It was an acceptance of each other's scars and strengths. Here, on Orathia, with an empire to drive away and 1,000 uncertainties lurking in the future, they found a moment of calm and something close to happiness. In the days that followed, Athion withdrew, many of its troops from the northern fortress. The fiasco of their demonstration had spooked them. Reinforcements from neighboring star systems did not arrive in time, and the rebels capitalized on the confusion to secure more territory. The alliance between Stormrune and Laris's fighters grew into a formidable front. More tribes emerged from hiding, emboldened by Stormrune's success. The planet had a chance at liberation. Raynor and Zelena occasionally discussed traveling off-world, perhaps to rally further aid or find advanced equipment for Orathia's defense. For now, though, their place remained here, guiding the rebels, standing guard against any renewed Athion aggression. Sometimes Laris joked that they should rename themselves the Dart Catchers Brigade, but Raynor would simply roll his eyes. Deep down, though, he felt that Arathia had become home, an unthinkable concept only weeks before. As for the vow, it was honored in a modest ceremony of Stormrun design. No grand halls, no formal speeches. Just the clans drumming and dancing, the swirl of colorful feathers, the scent of burning sage, and the elders' blessings. Zelena and Raynor stood together, newly married in the eyes of Stormrun custom. Laris teased that they should throw a big party for the rebels as well, but Raynor quietly declined. He preferred something simpler. That night, he and Zelena slipped away once again, crossing the vine bridge that led to a secluded tree platform. There, by the soft glow of the forest's luminescent flora, they shared a quiet meal and watched the distant flickers of the rebel camp's torches. She laid her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, mindful of his still healing shoulder, but unwilling to let that separate them. Silence stretched in a gentle hush. "What are you thinking?" she asked eventually, voice hushed. "I'm thinking that my life has been one mission after another," he said, "and I never once thought I could belong anywhere. But here I am, in a tribe that sees me as their own because of a random dart." He shook his head in wonder. "And I think maybe the galaxy has a sense of humor." Zelena's lips curled into a smile. "It does indeed. It brought us together in the strangest way." She laced her fingers with his. "I won't pretend that our battles are over. Atheon could strike again, but we'll face it together." He kissed her knuckles. "Yes, we will." Some nights he still woke in a cold sweat, haunted by memories of betrayal on old battlefields. But then he'd feel Zelena's warmth beside him, or remember how she had braved the serpent's jaws to claim the crucial venom that saved Orathia. Those thoughts offered solace. He had once sworn never to fight under another banner, but he realized that fighting for people you truly cared about was different than following orders. As the weeks turned into months, Atheon made a few half-hearted attempts to reclaim lost ground, only to be repelled by the newly unified force of rebels and Stormrun warriors. The synergy of local knowledge and rebel technology proved unexpectedly powerful. Though the planet was far from fully liberated, it was no longer a simple stepping stone for Atheon's expansion. The Empire had bigger problems now, especially once rumors spread that Arathia's defenders had discovered a countermeasure to their prized war beasts. Raynor's name circulated in whispered legend among the rebels. The man who had outrun death, who caught a poisoned dart and turned it into a wedding vow. The story sounded outlandish even to him. But each time he saw Zelena's eyes light with fierce determination or felt her hand reach for his before a battle, he knew that some stories, no matter how strange, were worth living. One evening, after a grueling skirmish on the Eastern Front, Raynor limped back to the Stormrun settlement, exhausted but victorious. He found Zelena outside the shaman's hut, sorting through bundles of herbs. She greeted him with a brief, tight hug, mindful of his bruises. "Another day, another minor victory," she murmured. He nodded. "They're testing us, looking for weaknesses. We won't let them find any." Her eyes flicked over him, noticing a cut across his brow. "Sit down. Let me clean that." He let her fuss over him with gentle efficiency. When she was done, they sat together in silence, the glowing embers of the evening fires illuminating the tribe's central clearing. A few children ran past, giggling, chasing a small, luminous beetle. Zelena watched them, a distant look in her eyes. For a heartbeat, Raynor recalled the vow that had begun it all. Catch a dart, earn a bride. Absurd. Yet here they were, forging a life in the midst of conflict. Part of him still yearned for a quiet beach, a worry-free existence. Then he caught Zelena's gaze and knew he wouldn't trade this for anything. She was the anchor he never realized he needed. She took his hand. "Someday," she said, "we might finally drive Atheon away for good. Then, Orathia can truly know peace. And maybe we can have our own kind of peace." He leaned in and brushed his lips to her temple. "I'd like that." And in the soft hush of the Stormrun night, their promise glowed as brightly as any star. Because in a galaxy filled with empires and endless wars, sometimes fate took the form of a poisoned dart caught in midair, and the unbreakable vow that followed turned out to be a salvation neither had expected.